I'm Prati Kamasani. I work at Avanade as doing basically data things. I run London Power BI user group. If you are here on Thursday, you may have seen me running Power BI user group here at SQL Bits. Those are my contact details. If you have any questions, you could reach out to me. So today, I'm going to talk about demystifying slicers and filters. I'm sure if you're familiar with Power BI, I'm sure we have heard Power BI reports called Power BI dashboard called Power BI reports, and our end users call slicers filters, filters slicers. So that's where the whole idea of talking about demystifying slicers and filters came from. So in real world, basically, the Power BI slicers and filters are nothing but they are there to refine the data on our visuals. Or it could be on visual, or it could be on our report pages, or it could be on dashboards. But however, they both are different. They're different in various ways, like, it could be the layout, how they behave, what are advanced options are there, and how many fields you could add, things like that. Behind the screens, when you look at it, how the what kind of DAX gets generated when you have a slicer or when you have a filter, it's pretty much same. There's not much difference. I've looked into every possible option. Most of the times, they both generate pretty much same DAX. So from the performance-wise, traditionally, there used to be some difference from the performance side, but in the current state of Power BI, there are not much difference from the performance side. But however, there are various differences. Before we understand what are the different use cases, let's try to understand what are slicers and filters. So the slicers are nothing but they are just visuals. Just like any other visual we have in our Power BI desktop or Power BI service, slicers are also visuals. However, based on the type of the data you add onto your canvas, they behave differently. So overall, we have three types of slicers. We have categorical slicers, date slicers, and hierarchies. So categorical and numeric slicers are when you have a categorical type of data or a numeric type of data, when you add them to your canvas, they're going to have different types. Like you could go for vertical format, you could go for horizontal format, or in the new world, you could go for tile format or vertical format, or you could go for drop down. You could do various things. Basically, you could have single selection, multiple selection, and things like that. When you have date type of data type or date time data type, your slicer properties changes a bit. So I think this is where it's quite nice because the style options that you have when you have categorical and numeric, that suddenly changes into more options. And this is where you have the options like relative date, or you have the nice options like a between. So you could have a nice slider, or you could have before this time or after this time. This is where it's quite nice when you could use that when you have data and time. And the other one you have when it comes to the slicers is the hierarchical slicers. So if you have a hierarchy in your data model, or if you want to slice your data based on more than one field, that's when you would use hierarchical slicers. It's quite nice to add a lot more content onto your slicer, or when you want to if you are coming from the paginator report world or SSRS report world, if you want this data-driven slices, hierarchy slicer can behave like those kind of a data-driven slices. On top of these three types, we have advanced options. We have sync slicers. Sync slicers means basically you could choose if you want to sync your slices among different pages. You also have this option called advanced. In the sync slices pane, you have this advanced options. This advanced options is so advanced, not many people know about it. I did blog about it a while ago, but even after I blogged, I still get confused. I actually had to ask a PM team, can somebody please explain? And then everyone said, oh, it's not my feature, that's feature, this feature. But basically what it is you have one slicer and you have another slicer. You could group them, you could give them a name. Even though each slicer comes from a different columns, the data can be synced but within the group. It is very complicated. There are probably -1 use cases where you actually going to use it, but it does exist there. And then we have other options. Even though its slicer is just a visual, Just like any other visuals, we have quite a few options. Like, you could export data, you could spotlight, you could use them in bookmarks and things like that. But you do also have an option called search. So that is quite nice when you have a lot of data. You could use the search option to slice inside the slicer. Because it's just a visual, you could also go to Marketplace and go and get some cool slicers like chiclet slicer or some other type of slicers. So it's a visual. On the other hand, what we have is filters. Filters are a functionality. Just like how we have bookmarks or selection pane or visuals of attributes, design views, and just like that, filters is a functionality of Power BI Desktop or Power BI Service. When it comes to filters, we mainly have two types of filters, which are manual filters and automatic filters. So the manual filters are the filters that you actually go and add to filter pane yourself. There you have different types. You have visual level filters, you have report level filters, and you have page level filters. On the other side, within the filters, we have automatic filters. Automatic filters are the filters which gets added automatically. So as soon as you create a visual, Power BI automatically adds fields into your visual in the filter pane. So those are automatic filters which gets added automatically. So for example, again, based on the type of, if it's a measure, if it's a dimension, or the type of the data, you have different options available in those filters. So for example, if you look at here, on the measure, we have different options, and on the dimension, you have different options. Again, it's also because of categorical data, it's a numeric data, so based on those, you have the different options. On top of that, we have so many other filters. So these are the filters some of them I didn't know that happens when you create the reports because we just take them for granted. So when it comes to the advanced filters, the first one, include and exclude filters. How many of you use include and exclude functionality in Power BI? It's very few, and it's a really good feature of the Power BI. I don't know, and I feel like we have to encourage end users to use this one a lot as well. So what is include and exclude features is like, when you go to a visual, we all know we could cross filter, right? But if you hold control, then you could hold multiple things. So when you hold control and multiple things, you could right click and you could choose include or exclude. So when you do include or exclude, what it does is it's basically adds those. For example, in this case, I have East Midlands and something else. It adds them to my filter pane. Okay, so those are include and exclude filters. The beauty of it is just like how when we are manually adding, this is a bit nicer way to add. And if you are trying to do analysis on certain type of, particularly like a certain region, you could just include that one and your entire report page basically includes that particular region. It's just nicer. The same thing goes to exclude. The next one is, the next one is, this is what it is, the include and exclude filters. And the next thing is the drill down filters. So the drill down filters is like when we have the drill down functionality. For example, in any visual, you could have more than one level. So from level 1 to level 2. When you go from level 1 to level 2, it automatically applies the drill down filters. Those are also, it gets added automatically. As a user, what you could do is, you could go to open the filter pane and clear it. Sometimes, but some of them, but the functionality is limited. You cannot do everything, but you could do only certain things based on what kind of level of access the end user have. The other thing we have is the cross drill filters. Cross drill filters is like, for example, when you're doing the cross filtering on the visual, cross drill filter gets applied whenever you're doing the cross drill filtering. on the overall report. When you are basically interacting on your visual, these kind of filters get automatically applied. The next thing is drill through filters. Whenever you use the drill through functionality in your report, for example, you go to your visual, you right click, you want to drill through to another page. Whenever you go to that next page, the filter passes through to the page 2. That is where you use the drill through functionality, and that filter gets passed. The drill through functionality is like, basically, this is where it kind of happens. The other thing which is important to know when you're using the drill through functionality is the keep all filter option. So whenever you enable the keep all filter option, what it does is all the filter which already exist in the page 1 travels through page 2 with the drill through. If you uncheck that box, it takes the filtering of only the current selected visual. Otherwise, it takes all the filters from the page 1 to page 2. So those are the drill through filters. The next two things not many people again uses are the URL filters and the pass-through filters. Probably pass-through filters is not really in our control, but the URL filters. How many of you use URL filters? Again, very few. So the URL filters is like, for example, you have the report page and you have a URL, right? On top of to the URL, you could append the filter with the filter, the table name, and the field name that you wanted to filter on. So what it means is for your end user, you could send a URL to your end user with predefined filtering. So it's basically enables that nice end user access. But these URL filters quite useful when you're like, when you're sending your end users to a different report page. Like you want to add links onto your page, that's when URL filters are quite nice to add these URLs. And the other one is pass-through filters. Pass-through filters again gets automatically added when you are using the Q&A functionality in the Power BI. So when to do what, how to use what is the difference between each of them. There is a really good Microsoft documentation which is available, or you could also go and ask ChatGPT if you're confused. If you don't want to read everything, you could go and ask ChatGPT, what should I do? But however, how do we know which one to use? When will it's quite confusing. How can we understand when to use what? And this is where it brings back to the same slides that we've seen before, is they are similar, but they are different for certain reasons. So for example, if you are thinking about position and layout, that's when, for example, if you look at this example, I want my slicer to be in a horizontal way. I wanted it to be on the top. I want end user to be able to just go and click on it and feel like they are in a different platform instead of Power BI. That's when I would probably use slicers. Or if I want to put it wherever I want, I want to keep it as a vertical pane. I want a single selection, and my slicer, I don't want it to look like a slicer. It's like overachieving kids, like, you want to do something else. That kind of times, you could probably use slices. But if I want to use, I want to space my canvas page, I don't want to put these random things. Instead of that, I just want to use my filter pane. For example, in this page, I have this whole page completely dedicated to map. If James Dales is in the audience, he would be very proud of me. But that's when you could use the filter pane instead of using the slices. Or if you have like a visual interaction, you're more you have a report page, you have multiple visuals on your page. But when you are interacting with your slicer, you want your slicer to only work with certain visuals, but not all the visuals. For example, if you look at this, my slicer interacts only with my map and this visual, but not that visual. That's when I would probably use slicer instead of using filter pane, because filter pane can use to single visual, single report page, or all the pages. I don't have a control of choosing only certain pages. Or when I am syncing, I want to sync my slicer, but only for certain pages. That's when I use slicer instead of using filter pane. But if I want something on all the pages, when I want to hide those blank values from my end users, they don't know, I didn't create a good model. So that's when I use the filter pane. Or when, this is where hide and unhide. It's like, this is a really good example. It's like, so for example, if you look at this page, what I have here is I have a slicer on the top. And what happens is when I hide the slicer, and when I go onto the visual, I could still see I have that section, that slicer being applied. But if I don't want my end user to know that this slicer been applied, so for now what I could do is I could actually add that as into a filter pane, and at the moment I could see, even though if I added it to filter pane, I could still see, but as soon as I go to my filter pane and hide the filter, when the end user hover over it, they won't be able to see that's been done. So this is when we do bad data modeling and we want to hide the things. This function works really good. And then again, the same thing about number of fields. When you're working with the number of fields, like in the slicer, I could nicely keep level 1, level 2, level 3, as much as we want. But if I want to do the same thing in the filter pane, it's get a bit clumsy. First I want to choose one thing, and then I go to another one, clear the top one, go back to the other one. So if I need more than one field to be able to work with, that's when I would probably go for slicer than the filters. Or there are so many other options that we cannot really cover in 20 minutes. But this gives you an idea about when do you do what. So things to remember: slicer is a visual, filter is a functionality. Slicer can be applied to single, multiple, or single visual, multiple visual in a single page or multiple pages. You can sync it, but a filter can be applied. Sorry, I just repeated that thing. That's wrong. Don't follow that. But a filter is more like a page or a multiple pages. To a visual, to a single page, or the entire page. And again, based on the number of fields that you have, you could choose between you want slicer or the filter. Or when you have the slicer, the options you have in the slicer and the options you have in the filters are different. Sometimes for certain things, the slicer has more things. You could do more formatting. You could do much more conditional formatting. You could play with more colors and things. But the filter pane, when you want to do for the formatting on the filter pane, sometimes it's not always works. This is good feedback for the Power BI team people here. It's sometimes you go and you update the background, you don't see it. You have to go to a different page and come back to it. That's the only time when you see it. So when you want more formatting, slicer works better than filter. But when you want to save the space, filter pane works better than the slicer. And when it comes to the date options, slicers has more date options compared to the filters. And but however, filter has this kind of top end functionality and things like that. Whenever you want to control, I want to show only 10 top end things, that's when I would probably use the filter than using the slicer. The sync slicers is a great functionality that is quite nice because you could control what pages you wanted to work with. But however, URL parameters and drill through parameters, those are also really good functionality, especially when you want to pass all the filters from one page to the other page. So that's when I would probably go for filters, but slicers has its own benefits when it comes to the sync page. The other thing, this is something I literally learned yesterday because I'm very good at changing my slides until the last minute. So slicers has the sort option. You could go to the slicer and you could change the sort order. Even end user has that functionality, go and change the sort. But when it goes to filter, you can't change the sorting. So it depends upon based on your existing sorting. And again, the slicers, you could control the cross-filtering, some just don't cross-filter this, and my slicer 2 first works, then slicer 1, which is also a very bad user experience. But however, if you wanted to make it a really complicated report, you could do that with slicer. But when it comes to filter, the order of the filtering goes on from what is the first filter, and then to the next filter and the next filter. So there is filters follows the order, but the slicer doesn't follow the order on the page. So That's a very quick minute, quickly of talking about slices and filters. If you have any questions, I'm here. You could come and talk to me. You could go to that URL. You will find the slides that you have seen today, even though the last slide is just repeated in the both text boxes. Ignore it. That's what happens if you change slides at the last minute. And this is the feedback form. Please provide the feedback, because that's really valuable for everyone, for me and to the SQL bits and everything. That's it, 20 minutes over. Thank you so much.